Welcome to another Coffee with Developers. We have another person here from Google Cloud, Logan Kilpatrick. Sorry about that. So where are you from? What do you do?
Hey, Chris. Thank you for having me. I work on Gemini stuff for developers. So I sit actually, our team used to be in Google Cloud. We now sit in Google DeepMind, which is sort of the research part of Google. And we're focused on how do we take Gemini models, how do we take the rest of Google's first party models like VO and Imagine and some of our Gemini embedding models and bring them to developers through the Gemini API and through Google AI Studio. Yeah, I live in Chicago. I spend a bunch of my time doing developer stuff, and it's a ton of fun. So excited to chat.
Cool. DeepMind has been around for a while, hasn't it? Like the research department, and then the Gemini and all the other bits that the branding on top came later on. So there was a lot of like health research and stuff in DeepMind as well, if I remember, a lot of machine learning and like data science before we put the stamp of AI on everything.
Yeah. So DeepMind actually started as an external company, was acquired by Google, I think in 2016 is when it was acquired, maybe 2014. And then for a while, actually, inside of Google, up until 2 years ago, the DeepMind was running independent of Google Brain, which was also started around the same time as DeepMind, which was running independent of Google Research. And they all actually had like very different mandates. And I think Gemini was as sort of the large language model opportunity to like sort of create this value horizontally across Google really became clear. I think all three of those organizations were merged together into a single place. And now DeepMind is focused on both a bunch of that horizontal foundational research, everything from language models to voice to image models to video models to world simulation models to AlphaFold and weather. We have the world's best weather model. So there's a bunch of like science bets as well. Focused on doing all that research, also focused on now actually how do we deliver those models to the world, and we deliver them to the world through Google Cloud, through other PAs like Search, but actually DeepMind also runs a bunch of products themselves. So we have AI Studio and the Gemini API, which I work on, and then the Gemini app as well, which is our consumer product surface. So DeepMind has evolved from the early days of what I think Demis and others set it out to be, which is doing this foundational research, to now really focused on how do we actually do the full life cycle of bringing value to the world.
I blogged about this lately where I was talking about the idea of model fatigue, where I'm kind of getting like, as a developer, and I just want to use AI, I look around and there's thousands of different models, like 50 different companies. Hugging Face offers me new things every week that I can take a peek at. So do you think that is just a sign of the time right now, that everybody is throwing out a lot of models, and it seems to be the time is getting shorter and shorter in between releases as well? So what can we do so developers don't get overwhelmed?
Yeah, Chris, I actually think you're spot on with this. I feel this way too, for what it's worth, and like I obviously spend my full-time job thinking about model stuff, so I can't fully complain as much as I think other developers who have a lot of other things to worry about other than just models. My hope is there's a bunch of product stuff that needs to be built to help developers more seamlessly answer these questions, and actually another product inside of Google that our team collaborates a bunch with is Kaggle. And the folks inside of Kaggle have been working for a long time, and it's not. I think it's not fully out yet. So hopefully the Kaggle team doesn't hear me talking about their forthcoming stuff and come after me. But something they've been thinking a lot about is like personal benchmarks, and like how you can create, like as a developer, you sort of articulate, here are the things that I care about, and then every time there's a new model launch, it's like as simple as, hey, your personal benchmark is run on that new model. You get an email, you say, hey, this new model is maybe worth checking out because it scores really well in these 5 things that you said as a developer you care about. Or, hey, all these models, don't really move the needle for the core metric, but maybe they're really good at this other thing that you said that you were tangentially interested in. So I think there's actually like a product story that can help make this a little bit easier for developers. And I'm hopeful that like more products will build that in, because I completely agree. Like I don't have enough time in the day to go and test every new open source model that ends up on Hugging Face and the 50 other models that are coming out every week. So like it would be really great if there was products to help me do that. And I think folks are just starting to build the interfaces to allow folks to do that a little bit more seamlessly.
Do you see that? I mean, you listed lots of models when we started earlier as well. Do you see that there is a tendency for developers to move away from the all-encompassing huge LLMs to more specific use case models that they actually use? Because it seems to me like trying to access the internet of the wealth of knowledge of everything just because I want some code completion is not the most efficient way of doing it, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this depends on like what problem are you trying to solve. And I think it's actually becoming, 2 years ago, I think what you just described, I think was like more of the trend, which was, the models actually weren't that good in general. And the problems that people were solving were like very narrow problems. I think now as we sort of like keep taking a step farther out of like how big is the problem space that you're trying to solve. I went from like, okay, I want to build a chat app to like now you're building an end-to-end agentic system to do everything for your users or whatever it is. Like that's just like a wildly different scope. And in that product, I think there are places where it would probably make sense to have domain specific models, but there's all of these places where like the domain specific models lose, the world knowledge, or you trade off a bunch of things where it makes a lot of sense. To have sort of a general purpose model that can do everything pretty well. And I think the added layer of this is like, it requires the experimentation to figure out like, where can I actually do this? So there's like some amount of like developer experience trade-off where it's like, yes, you actually probably could do a bunch of domain specific models. The amount of work to do that is like probably pretty substantial in some cases. So like, how do you find the balance of that? And I think this goes back to like the challenge that developers have, which is there's like so much happening right now that it's not clear like where you should be making the investment. And I don't have the perfect answer, but there are definitely places where you want domain specific models. I think there's definitely places where like the general purpose models are still better, or it's just like orders of magnitude easier to do that setup than a different setup.
I mean, it was interesting. I didn't know that Kaggle was part of Google now, because I only remember it as like the competition site where basically you had machine learning algorithms, and you were asked to actually. I think the best example was the Titanic tickets, like how likely you were to survive the Titanic disaster, in which class of the ship you were. So they had that data set for you to play with. And I found it a very interesting, like very academic playground kind of thing. It's interesting that this becomes now part of this, because the other thing that when we started with the whole AI bit was, of course, things like Hugging Face and others. Basically, the idea was that we started marketplaces where you could train a model and then sell it to others. It's kind of out of the window. I haven't seen anybody doing that. I think most people just use a model that somebody offers and build a UX on top of it, right?
Yeah, that's a good push. Kaggle's been a part of Google for a long time now. I think they're just like very Kaggle. They've got a very specific DNA, so it doesn't look like the rest of Google. But it has been really interesting to see like how much a lot of the core foundations of what Kaggle has built, and also Hugging Face, and I think there's other platforms that are in that category, how much that information actually translates really interestingly well to this current AI moment. Like the Titanic example, you look at all the scaffolding, and like basically that's like an online real-time leaderboard. Like they've built this really interesting competitions infrastructure, which happens to work really, really well for this current AI moment, because of like the questions that developers are trying to answer, and like the whole, leaderboard of like trying to keep track of model progress and stuff. So there's a whole lot of really, really interesting stuff happening. I do think your push on like people training models and then selling them and having that be a marketplace, it is interesting how much, and maybe this just speaks back to the question of like how powerful it is to have these like general purpose horizontal models. But I would have guessed that there would have been like individual people who were selling models themselves. Like I personally find some like nuance and some angle of how I want a model to respond, and I sort of turn that into a product and I sell it. I think people have kind of done that with like chatbots at the application layer, but like there hasn't been as many like smaller versions of that at the like quote unquote model level. And I think it's honestly mostly driven by the fact that the models are just so general purpose that it's really easy to replicate that sort of behavior that you might sort of tune a model to do, because the models are all like the floor has gone up so much from like a capability perspective that it's just easy for it to transition between different personas and use cases and stuff like that.
It's interesting. When I started in that whole space, it was basically with my former company, and all of the APIs that I talked about, much like you in DevRel, was about face recognition. It was about natural language processing. It was about like image detection of objects in images. And then we actually came up with the LLMs, and now we come up with the multimodals, and now we come up with an agentic web. So it seems like we're throwing a lot more functionality to developers, but under the hood, we're still using a lot of these old systems. So when you talk to developers, what are the things that people are mostly looking for? Is it like, or to say it another way, where do they get stuck when they actually try to implement their first AI things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the challenge is actually the interesting trend in AI is it's so easy to get started and it's so easy to make like the sort of demo version of what you want to work well. It's like the last mile challenge, like, to the extreme, I think, in AI right now, this current generative AI moment, because the models are, again, they can do so much that you get some perhaps like very odd behavior. Whereas like in historically, like the, you know, computer vision classification model, what like the failure mode is just like a misclassification or something like that. And I think the failure mode for LLMs can be actually like a pretty extreme difference in what you would get from a model output perspective. So I think there's just like a whole lot of the tooling and the thought about how to put these things into production, which if you look at like, again, like broader industry trends, like one of them has been this narrative that like no one's using AI in production. Like most AI is only for demos and like it's hard to put AI in production. I think this is partially true. I think a lot of this has been driven by the fact that the models came out and like, circa early 2023, mid 2023, there was lots of good models out there. Even in 2024, the infrastructure just wasn't good for developers. So like, again, it was really easy to like make something work really well on your local computer and you make some some cool demo and it looks cool and all that stuff. And then you want to take that to production scale. All of a sudden there's like a whole different class of problems. Yeah, and it's interesting. As somebody who spent like same, I'm in the same boat as you, Chris. Like I spent the early part of my career working and training and deploying computer vision models, and it didn't feel like that. It was kind of like you had a test set, you had a validation set. If you were like it's good to go, and then we went and deployed it, and it like kind of worked in production as well. And it was like it felt a lot more. I mean, it was harder to get the models to do useful stuff because they were like so focused on one specific thing, but it wasn't, the delta between like locally and in production was not that great. And it feels like in LLM world, it's just, there's this wildly different scope required for each of those things.
Yeah, and it feels sometimes scary for developers to actually start in that space as well, because you hear these horror stories of people that build APIs, that build their own apps on top of APIs, and then get successful, get like their product hunt moment or something, or I don't know what else, where people publish things these days, and then out of a sudden realize they have to pay a lot to the provider of the LLM rather than like having a local cache that they can run against. So what do you say? Should be worried about that as developers, or is there a way to actually make sure we mitigate these issues from the very get-go when we're using systems like yours?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this is like a very real problem for developers. Like I think it's hard to underscore how much of a problem. And I think it is the fundamental limitation of being able to build useful AI products in today's era, is like there is just a pretty non-trivial amount of economic cost associated with that. And I think if you're a venture-backed AI company, like it's reasonable, you can deal with it, you can go raise money and do that. I think if you're just an average developer thinking about this, you have to be a lot more diligent and like thinking about what does monetization look like, how do you build get users, how do you make sure there's no fraud happening, like all of these problems, which like I don't think like in a world where you're paying for CPU compute instead of like GPU or TPU compute, it's just like orders of magnitude difference in cost. and you can just like kind of not have to worry about some of those problems. I think this is actually why like I've been personally very happy with what we've been doing from a Gemini perspective. Like if you look at a couple of these like core principles, we've been pushing the Pareto frontier from like a cost intelligence perspective since Gemini 1.5 when the models sort of started to become like really widely used. So they are at like each class of model category, from like even our smallest models to Gemini 2.5, it's like the highest cost, the lowest cost per intelligence that you could possibly have from a model perspective. So I feel very good about that. We also like have the world's best free tier from an API perspective. So developers who like want to show up and try the latest models and try to build something and like don't want to put a credit card in. I think that's been like for AI to have the level of impact, especially in this like platform shift moment where like a lot of new people are showing up and trying to wrap their head around this. Like it's really important that we have that from like a core principle perspective. And we've leaned into it, and like, you know, tons of people using Gemini for free because of that, which I'm super happy about. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think there's still much more that we can do, and I still think it's like a top of mind problem for developers as costs continue to change over time. But yeah, I think we've done some positive things so far.
One thing that was deterring to me as well in the past was that when you wanted to use an API or a certain provider, then you also had to start buying into the infrastructure. Like it seems like almost every big LLM provider also has an editor now that they're building themselves, rather than like me allowing me to use my VS Code or my Vim or whatever I use to make it easier. And it feels to me like back in when the cloud was started around, like there were some providers that allowed me to do everything from the terminal. Others I had to actually sign into a portal first and actually do a drag and drop thing to get my server sorted. And so how do you play with that balance within Gemini? Is it you just start at the studio, or is it something that you can just start a command line and start pinging an endpoint to start playing with the APIs? Or where do you want people to go? Why would I choose to actually use an editing environment provided by an LLM provider rather than using my own?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think so two things. One, like one of our core principles has been like, let's meet developers where they are. Like I think that's the expectation from developers today. Like there's tons of different tools that folks are using. They're not all using Google tools, which is totally fine and perfect. So we want to be accessible to developers where they want to use, you know, Gemini models. AI Studio's purpose from a product perspective is like help you, you know, for free, test out the Gemini models, make sure that they're really useful for you and solve your problems, and then get an API key and get out of AI Studio and head into whatever your developer tool is of choice. So like we don't want folks to be, to have to stay in AI Studio to get value. Actually, principally, we want to get you out of AI Studio and we want you to go back to your development environment, because like that's the use case that we care about, is you actually building something that you're excited about. I think your broader meta point about like what are the model providers' role to play in this world is something that we also think a lot about. Like I think developers, again, through this lens, want model agnostic infrastructure because it's not super clear to developers what's going to happen from the model perspective. And like you don't want to tie all your infrastructure to a model, because then, you know, another model shows up and it's better at this thing that you care about, and you want to have the option to go to that model. So we've thought a lot about like how do we focus on providing primitives that like allow people the flexibility that they want, while also like finding the things that Google is uniquely good at, which is like building this, you know, crazy infrastructure at scale where billions of users can use it, et cetera, et cetera. And like that's a very uniquely Google problem that we can solve. There's a whole lot of other stuff that like, you know, we're probably not as well suited to solve, and like we should let the rest of the ecosystem solve those problems, and we'll provide things that, you know, lean well into the work that Google does well, and for other things we'll sort of stay away from them.
It's interesting that on the one hand, AI is sold as a democratizing development, that anybody can start becoming a developer. Let's not get into vibe coding because I'm getting very angry when we talk about that too much. But but the problem that I see as a European now who doesn't travel to America as much as I used to, there seems to be a kind of a gatekeeping thing where a lot of models are available in the US or in Asia or in Japan or some European ones. So for the it feels like back in like a DVD creation when you had to create the same model for like different markets. And do you think there is a way around that, or is this something that we just have to live with because it seems to be a political decision rather than just a technical decision, right?
Yeah, it's definitely not a technical decision. I think like as a product builder, I get messages all the time from folks in Europe because there's oftentimes like a difference in availability in Europe and other geographies around the world. And yeah, we want our stuff to be available. I think there's a bunch of political, legal ramifications around the use of AI places outside the U.S. that I think make it that you just have to make a different set of decisions. So I think in general, like we want folks in Europe to be using the models, and I'm hopeful that we'll get to a place soon where that will be the case. In general, like for Gemini models, they are available. There's like certain features and certain models that have less availability. But yeah, it's something that we think about a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I remember when Google now is google.com everywhere and all the domains are gone, like Google FR and these kind of things just redirect right now. So that seems to be a simplification of the system because it was not necessary in the first run. So it's in that way where these models are available for you is an interesting thing to consider. Now, when people build AI systems, one of the criticisms you hear a lot is that there's a lot of AI bots out there that are scraping content from the web and not actually being recognizable as an AI scraper. Like Wikipedia just had an announcement that they had like 30% more traffic because of all the things coming and getting their data, and now they actually released it as a model on Hugging Face to actually counteract that kind of problem. So, do you think there's a need to educate people when they're actually building apps on top of AI that it's just not it's easy to get content from somewhere else, but it's also the ramification of it is like, are you allowed to do it, or what can you do with it? Like every demo that I see right now is like, oh, I wrote a Chrome extension that scrapes websites and makes something with it. And you're like, yeah, that's as illegal as like they're using them with JDownloader or something like that in the past. So it seems like there's a lot of like, oh, AI can scrape things for me, so I can do it. Do you have people asking you that kind of stuff, or do you have horror stories where people actually got reprimanded for that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think like at the top level, from like a Google point of view, like I think we think about this a lot because I think Google's historically been like this. I think about us as like this, providing a stewardship role on the internet, and like we're obligated as Google to like make sure that we're making decisions not only in the best interest of Google, but in the best interest of like this entire internet economy that's been built. And it's really important. And like I think like scraping and crawling and all that stuff is like one of these great examples where like there are established principles about how this works, and like there are people have robots.txt, and there's other mechanisms for other like opt-outs from different tools. My general assessment is like I agree with your comment that like I don't think that is, depending on like sort of the level that you're building at, like people just don't think about it as much, and they definitely should be thinking about it, because I think there's like real there's real challenges of not sort of being educated about like what the lines are and what the ramifications are. I do think that's also why, like, back to what we can do to help provide this. Like, I think from the Gemini side, like we actually provide an integration with Google Search, and through that integration, you can actually like go out and access Google Search indexes, and we provide inline citations, and there's a bunch of requirements around like how you show citations and how you like link back to like Google search results and stuff like that. And it's all through this vein of like, how can we make sure that, given the position that we're in, we have this sort of stewardship model, and create value for the rest of the ecosystem, and like still send people to all the sites that they were interested in going to before. So I think more folks will hopefully do this in the future as well.
When Gemini became multimodal, it basically was a big thing, and a lot of people talked about it, a lot of headlines about it. Do you see that in use with developers, or are most of the use cases that people build things on top of Gemini, are they text-based, or is there a lot of like video, image generation, these kind of things happening as well?
There's definitely a lot of text-based stuff, though it is exciting to see the like trend line of where multimodal use cases are going. I think it's just like they're slightly more nascent, but there's definitely a huge amount of value. I think, again, like selfishly, as someone who spent the early part of my career training computer vision models, like there really is a lot of there's a lot of use cases that like were just hard to solve before, and like now they just like kind of work out of the box with language models that have multimodal capabilities. So it's been awesome to see. And I think video is actually the more has been one of even the more emerging ones, where like now we actually provide we have video understanding natively in the models, and this current iteration of Gemini 2.5 Pro is like the world's best state-of-the-art video understanding model. And there's so much. I was having a conversation with a company a few weeks ago, and they were talking about like how much internal knowledge is locked behind a bunch of like video that they like the company owns. They just like don't have an easy way to understand and access the content that's in those videos. And I think that's like, I think of like the internet era of like everyone accumulating a bunch of this data. And like in many ways, like the data has not been useful at the like personal level. Like I have, tons of pictures and videos and files everywhere, and like I can't really do anything with it because it's not super accessible. And I think there's a bunch of really, really compelling products to be built around like helping you actually make use and sort of potentially take action on all of this content that you're sitting on, or that your organization is sitting on, et cetera. So I think we're much more to see in that field.
It's interesting that part of in operating system space, this has been a thing for quite a while. Like when you on Mac OS or also on Windows, if you search for a word that's inside an image, it actually will find it. And I found that fascinating that these things just like crop up without you realizing it. There's also preview on Mac. I can do a Command-Shift-K to remove the background of an image. It's a keyboard shortcut that's nowhere documented. It's just in there, and I found it by chance. And I love that I love when AI comes in that way, that it just becomes a productivity thing that you just don't realize. It just aids you along rather than like you have to press that thing. When it comes to implementation of AI functionality, the sparkly icon has become kind of a dark pattern by now, because there's far too many of them all over the place. How do you tell people what's the best way of actually using Gemini APIs and other AI systems in their products? Is it something that should run in the background, or is it something that people should always opt into?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the best product experience is sort of the models and AI just like behind the scenes creating value for you. Like that's what I want as a user. Like I don't actually want to talk to a chatbot. What I want is the model to go and do a bunch of useful stuff for me. I think the challenge is that product experience is hard to build. Like it's not trivial to go and make a really great product experience. And oftentimes where people start is like the very manual AI experience. And sort of over time, as you sort of better understand what users want and what you're actually trying to do and what the limitations are of what you're building, you sort of get to a place where AI is sort of more in the background. I think the confounding factor is like putting AI front and center is like part of the like moment right now. So I think actually more so than it's like the previous platform shift of like mobile. It's like people saying like, yeah, we're a mobile company, and like we're going to put mobile in the name of our company and stuff like that. I think that's what people are doing with AI right now. Where like everything is an AI company, AI is front and center, and like the messaging and the marketing. And I think a lot of that makes sense. Like, so it's like I have empathy for founders and developers, because you want to signal that you're on the cutting edge, and sort of having AI too abstracted away, sort of you maybe miss some like riding the wave of AI basically. But I think long term, the best products are, you're not going to think about AI. It's just going to go and do a bunch of stuff and create value for you, which I'm excited about as a user of too many AI products.
I mean, one thing also that drove me nuts is when you have lots and lots of data sets. Like we had like 4,500 hours of footage from our last conference, and I had them on an external hard drive. And to actually get them transcribed and get the videos analyzed, I had to upload them to some cloud rather than running it locally. But I mean, I'm used Whisper on the terminal for that one, but the results were not that good. Is there any way I can actually, in your API space, that I can use some local data that is really, really huge to actually convert locally rather than having to upload it to Google Cloud first?
Yeah, that's a great question. Most of at least on the Gemini API today, you definitely it requires data to be uploaded. But all the Gemma models that we have are open source models. If you can run them locally on your hardware, and there's a bunch of like super small models that are 3 billion parameters or 7 or 8 billion parameters. Can definitely run locally. I don't know how well they would work for specifically the transcription use case, but I think developers and just like people using AI systems want this. Like I think it's like, there's a bunch of privacy considerations. It's also just like uploading a bunch of data takes a long time. And like I think about, everyone has like limitations on their internet provider of like how much content they can upload and download. So like there's real like practical limitations, and being able to do things locally, I think makes perfect sense. And for us, it's the same research and innovation that's powering Gemini is what ends up powering Gemma, which is our open source set of models. So I think we're sort of getting those out into the ecosystem as much as possible for folks who have a bunch of the constraints on local, trying to run these workloads locally.
Do you see a lot of uptake of people using open source models from Google, or is there? I mean, I worked for Mozilla, so I worked in the hardcore open source space. And as soon as you say large company XYZ, people are like, no, not going to use that one, trying to find a more open model. Do you think is there a lot of faith in these open source models, or is it because I mean there were a lot of companies that claimed to be open but weren't? Like what is the licensing thing there, and how do you work with people that are not that on your side about this and worrying about taking something open that might be closed in the future?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'm in I didn't work at Mozilla, but I was on the board of NumFocus, which is the nonprofit that supports all the open source scientific projects like SciPy, NumPy, Jupyter, Julia, etc. So I spent a bunch of my early career working on open source stuff, and I think it is interesting, like as a meta comment, how much this and OSI and other organizations have been doing this sort of trying to articulate what open source AI means. And it's contentious, and it actually looks very different than what the previous sort of definition of what open software meant. Like there was a very agreed upon definition of what open software meant. And I think the current iteration of these open models don't follow the same mold, which I think has been like a part of the controversy of bringing these models to the ecosystem. In general, I think for us, it's super important to do this stuff. Like, again, I think there's like very real practical limitations on use cases that require you having open model weights and weights that you can actually put on your computer and sort of not send a request to a cloud server. And actually, oftentimes, interestingly, like sort of corollary to the comment you made about trusting, I think this depends on like, open source developers is like a very broad group of people. So like a lot of different opinions. One of the things I hear the most is actually that the thing people like about the Gemma models is that they're coming from Google, and like they trust that Google is going to do a bunch of stuff in order to like keep them in the, from a privacy perspective, from a licensing perspective, et cetera. Which has been positive. I think that I'm sure there's developers who would say the opposite. But it has been interesting to try to find the line to walk. But it's super important to us, and like I'm glad that we've continued to make the level of investment in Gemma models as we have.
We talked to a few friends of mine in Google at our event last month as well, and there's a lot of like on-device systems coming in Chrome. And like the navigator.ai object gives you access to some of these things. And I find that really exciting because I love to do things on my own machine. The problem is that Google doesn't have an operating system. Like, I mean, Apple has, Microsoft has, Linux is not owned by anybody, but it would be an interesting. Do you think that this is a limitation? Would it be great to have like more Chrome machines out there or Chrome desktop machines out there that you could do things like that as well?
Yeah, I do. I have a Chrome laptop, and yeah, I mean, I think you can do a lot of cool stuff at the operating system level. So like I have envy for those who sort of control the end-to-end operating system space. And I think there's actually a lot of really cool products that you can build. Um, yeah, I think for Google, it's like we have a specific place in the ecosystem, and I think there's value to be. There's like a whole lot of problems to solve to make a great, developer experience for people doing stuff in Chrome, as an example, and putting models there. So I think we've got our hands full and plenty of stuff to do.
Well, you got Android, that helps. I guess that's a good place to split to play. And I mean, lately, I think there was also now access to the screen that you can actually see what's happening on the phone to run that through the Gemma models. How did that work out in terms of security and privacy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think on the Gemini, I think this is through the live Gemini Live, which is on the Gemini app locally for Android folks. Yeah, I think it's like I don't actually have the specific details on what they're doing from from a privacy perspective. My assumption is it's in line with all the rest of the stuff that folks are doing, which is like getting permission from users. You can run a bunch of this stuff locally. The stuff that's not run locally, doing it in like a secure way that like Google can do at a multi-billion user product scale perspective. So I think it's like oftentimes back to this thread of like, what are the problems that Google is uniquely suited to solve? And I think these are actually some of the like hard problems that Google is uniquely suited to solve from a security, from an infrastructure standpoint, which has been awesome to see.
It's interesting that the fight on the mobile space was like, let's put the best camera lenses in there and the most amazing things. And I think the last few years, it's like what the camera in the phone was less important than the software to edit the photos afterwards. Like whatever I take on my Pixel looks completely different 5 seconds later because the machine actually the AI enhanced the image the way I wanted to. Stabilization seems to be a thing that just automatically in there. Again, this is just like in the background, beautifully useful things. Are all of these things that are actually in Google Photos and also in the Photo app available as models for me to use as well? Can I do that on like, say I have 5,000 blurry images? Is there an API to actually upscale those easily?
My assumption is no, but I think Google Cloud has a whole lot of stuff. So maybe there actually is an upscaling API. I'm not sure. I haven't played around, but it's a good question. I'll dig around, just because I've actually been upscaling a bunch of images as well, and I've just been like digging around and finding like random tools or open source models. But it'll be a fun side project this weekend to see if we have something that does that.
So when it comes to implementations of your models through APIs, is there any feedback channel? Like, say I actually create something with it, and I find that in the model there's an hallucination or there is something that is completely wrong. Can I feedback as an implementer that this is wrong and I don't want to see it again, rather than using my own rack or my own server in front of it?
So we don't have like a programmatic way of doing this. We have like a bunch of like open channels that you can get in contact with us. Discuss.ai.google.dev is our developer forum, and you can go there and share some of the feedback. We do have this built into our own product. So in AI Studio, you can sort of give like model by model response feedback to say like, hey, this is giving a wrong answer, etc. Doing that at the developer level is something that we've thought about, because I think there's people who have this signal from their users and they want to be able to do something with it. And it's actually, from conversations I've had, it's not trivial to like take that type of user feedback and like make a meaningful, like, what do you actually do when someone says this model response is bad? There's like a whole, even for Google, it's oftentimes not easy to like understand what we should actually do as the next step. So I think that's definitely like an emergent problem space that folks are going to have to solve. And I'm sure there's products out there that sort of help folks do that.
How do you deal with the amount of feedback you get? I mean, when I worked on huge open source projects, triaging 5,000 pull requests that came in a day was a full-time work for a whole team. But I guess this is where AI shines by now as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think you get a little bit of benefit from like auto raters and like models doing some of the analysis on feedback themselves. Though I'll I spend a lot of my personal time looking at feedback, and this is more sort of generically across the whole stack of the product. So there is a lot of like human touch involved in sort of seeing the feedback, because it's oftentimes people sort of give you a sliver of the story, and you have to dig a little bit to like get to the sort of piece that actually makes it useful to like take action on the feedback that someone's given. So our team spends a ton of time doing that, and there's a little bit of AI sprinkled in, but there's still a lot of human effort involved.
So what is an API endpoint or an API functionality that just came about that you're super excited about? What is one thing that you're just like, wow, that's clever. I didn't know we can do that.
Yeah, I think the biggest one right now is the live API. So the live API allows you to create these AI voice agents slash AI agents that are able to see and hear the things that you show them. So the best example is like similar to how you can do in sort of a Google Meet call or a Zoom call. You can actually share your screen and ask the model and have a conversation with the model about what's on your screen. And this becomes really, really powerful, because back to the challenge of like building products in the AI era, the challenge right now for today's AI products is you have to do all of the work to be done is on the end user to find the right context to give to the model in the right moment. And like that's actually a hard thing to do. And like I think that's actually for folks who have used AI tools and like haven't really had the best experience. Oftentimes it's because you know the product is just asking you to do a bunch of work, and it's like actually not saying that in any way. It's just kind of assuming that you're going to know you have to go and like get a bunch of stuff and bring that to the model in order for it to be useful to you. And the cool thing about the live API is you just sort of, short circuit that whole thing and get around it by just, the model sees what I see with your permission, and you can actually just like have the conversation and have it take action and do things like asynchronous function calling as you say things, or as it hears things or sees things. It can sort of trigger systems on the back end. It's connected to Google Search. It has a code execution environment. And it's like all of this through a single API that's like a developer can get up and running with in like 5 minutes or less. I'm excited for this like next generation and set of products that people are going to be able to build by using the live API. And we've got a whole bunch of stuff at, I don't know when this recording will go live, but Google I/O, which is in a couple of weeks, we'll have a whole bunch of new stuff coming for I/O, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, I remember the first time I used my Pixel in a country with Cyrillic writing and like filming street signs and having Google Translate automatically translate that for me and overlay it with type in the video as well. That was just mind blowing. And I think these kind of things are just, again, like there's a use case beforehand in a product, and then it becomes an accessible API later on for me as a developer. And I think that's super exciting because it shows to me that probably was built with the API to start with. And I'm a big fan of building the API first and then building the product around it, because then you can build thousands of different products rather than just like the one app to rule them all. So when I talked to your colleague earlier, Ryan, who worked with me before in other companies, he's like, I'm done with chatbots. I don't want to have another app that people build that is a chatbot to actually talk to, because we got enough of those. So do you still have people that actually want to do their own thing? It feels to me like when we put like helpful chatbots in Flash movies back in the days, like IKEA had one of those, and like, or we try to integrate Google Siri and others into everything that like talk to you something about our product. Is this going away, or is it still the story that a lot of people want to build because worked for ChatGPT, so I can do it as well, right?
Yeah, I think the use case that we've seen from the live API perspective that's been most helpful is like actually guiding users through product experiences. Like there's a whole lot of like internet product experiences which aren't super trivial to use. And like you could just grab a bunch of random examples, like, Photoshop as an app is not easy to use as a new user. And how do you as a new user sort of figure your way out through that. Oftentimes you don't, like, is the actual answer. Like, you just kind of have a very small set of functionality which you use. Everything else is out of reach unless you like really become an expert and start to understand all those things. And what we've seen that's cool about the live API is it is less of this like, chat with a customer support bot. It's more of like, talk to this thing like I would like a coworker, looking over my shoulder, and be like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Like, tell me about this product that I'm using right now. And I think that use case is actually really powerful because there's so many people who, and I'm one of them. And I even in like IDEs, I sit in an IDE, I'm like, there's definitely a bunch of random buttons in my IDE that I'm looking at right now that I have no idea what they do. And like, that's the kind of use case. And I've spent years and hours a day inside of an IDE. And there's a lot of products where you have much less experience. And it would be so helpful to have somebody like virtually guide you through that and see the things that you do and see the errors and the bugs that you do. So I'm very bullish on that use case for a lot of complex products. And we've seen some great traction from people building it into their products so far.
And that's why it also needed access to do clicks and to enter content and to do automated things that weren't possible before from a chat system or something like that. So it feels like, when we did things like automated testing with Puppeteer, and these kind of things are now happening with agents and with LLM with AI models to actually do that work for you. Makes you wonder if they should have done a better job in UX research before they built the thing, before it became so complex. But that's always easy to say at the end of it when things grew organically over the years.
Yeah, it is definitely this organic story. But I think that's the other angle is like, I know you don't want to talk about vibe coding, but I think the cool thing about like maybe less vibe coding, but like generative interfaces that sort of dynamically are created based on what a user's desire is and what they're actually trying to do, I think is like actually a really interesting thing. For you could imagine like, the photo editing app is sort of changing as you as a user use the product, and like your skill set changes and your the things, your use case changes, the product changes, and sort of abstracts away the complexity. And in like today's version of building software, that's literally not possible. But I do think in this, like, the model can write and execute code on your behalf world, it does become possible for that. So I think that's the sort of tangential to vibe coding use case that I'm super excited about.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I also talked with Paul Kinlan from Google about this a few months ago on the same show, where it's like it allows people to build their own little apps for things they need to do. What I don't see it as a professional tool to build the next model that actually just goes out, the next app that goes out to millions of end users without actually going through a proper test process. But like building a throwaway app that you just need for yourself by talking to a machine is really exciting. And I think this is like basically, it feels like Star Trek holodeck when like, and now do this in the background, now to build this for me, and it generates some app for me that is a one purpose thing to do. So I'm really excited about that. I'm just very worried about like the hype around it, like, oh, it's unnecessary to have developers anymore. I guess you working with developers using AI, I think we're not in the agentic AI space where the machine thinks for itself. I think there's still a need for developers to proper do their structuring and planning of their apps before they create them.
I think you're spot on. I think all of the narrative about you shouldn't learn to code or developers are going away, I think, is people who don't spend enough of their time actually building things and understand what's happening on the ground. So I completely agree with you. I think developers are going to become even more valuable over time. The demand for software in the world is essentially infinite. Like, there are so many interesting new problems to be solved. AI being able to be a part of the software creation story, like, doesn't diminish the fact that you need humans in the driver's seat in order to build things. So I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
So if I want to get started with what you offer, what's the easiest way of doing it, and what are limitations that I have?
Yeah, go to ai.dev or aistudio.google.com, and you can literally, start playing around with the latest Gemini models for free. and you can get an API key and in 3 clicks, go and have a free API key and start building something with Gemini right now. So we've tried to optimize to make it as frictionless as humanly possible. So it should be super easy for folks to get started.
And how many times do you have people that put that API key in then source code and put it on GitHub so other people will find it too?
Probably too many, but I think the nice thing is the API key is free, so at least you're not shooting yourself in the leg in the proverbial sense. You can go in and delete the key and not need to worry about it. But for people who have a paid API account, you definitely need to be more careful about where you put that key.
So where do you find documentation on that? And is the documentation written by humans or do you generate it?
It is written by humans. I think we've tried to look into, is there a path to generating stuff with AI? My intuition is like, it's still very easy to tell when something is written by AI and developers want something that's written by humans because you can sort of more tastefully tell the story. And we link if you go to AI Studio, we have a link to the documentation in the top right-hand corner. So it's there and it should be super easy to find.
So do you have generative APIs that I can generate, for example, images and videos? And if so, have they been used a lot by people?
Yeah, same platform you can actually use, and we have a unified page for all of our generative media stuff that's landing in the next few days. Gemini can natively generate images. We also have a specific image model called Imagine, and we have VO, which is our state-of-the-art video model. So both of those are available in AI Studio. Both of those are available to developers via the API. And I think there's definitely some usage, which has been exciting. I think the generative media use cases are much more limited relative to like the text model use cases and coding and et cetera. So, but we've definitely seen people building some cool like creative applications.
Well, I mean, they're costly to start with. I mean, like there's lots of energy involved. There's lots of like, I mean, when like the Studio Ghibli thing took over the internet, 700 million pictures in 1 week, not a small amount of energy wasted on something that's good for 10 seconds and then you get bored with it again. So it's an interesting concept. It was interesting to see how many of these things go back to Google research from the past. I remember the first Transformers papers, and then like the art taking an image and taking an artist's style and putting it on there. That was a long time ago, wasn't it? Like the Starry Night pictures that actually generated images, and back then most of the people like, what the hell is that? And then 5 years later, everybody does it on their mobile phone. Do you think that acceleration time will get shorter and shorter, or will we hit the wall at one time?
That is a good question. I think the last few years has been a lot of investment in sort of the infrastructure to make this stuff happen and happen quicker. So like my instinct is, I think there's pressure on both ends of the spectrum. On one hand, it's like it becomes hard. There's less low hanging fruit. So there's, pressure on how fast new innovation happens. But on the other side is like you have this like massive amount of infrastructure investment that's been made, and you have all the knowledge sharing across researchers in the ecosystem of like what works and what doesn't work and where the potential new areas of opportunity are. And I think reasoning has been this like most recent example of this, where like I remember like December of last year, the narrative was, AI is hitting a wall. And if you look like now, I think that narrative like doesn't exist. And I think a lot of that has been because of the reasoning models and like the reinforcement learning stuff to make models better at like solving more complicated problems has worked really, really well. So I think there's so much innovation still to be had. I think, does the absolute rate of innovation increase? My guess is yes, because there's more opportunities for innovation as like the systems become more complicated. But I think it'll also become harder and harder for there to be like net new things that are happening because of how many like teams and groups and companies are pushing in the space.
When it comes to using the things that you provide, what are the languages that most of the people actually use, and what is the preferred one in your area? Like, do you support all programming languages environments, or are there some that basically might get you faster to the goal?
Yeah, from an SDK perspective, we support Python, Node/TypeScript. We have Go and we have Java, I believe. There's like community support for other SDKs. We also like, you can use all the OpenAI SDKs with our models. You can use all the AI SDK from Vercel. So like, there's tons of interoperable options in the ecosystem. So we have a pretty varied support. I think our sort of trend lines look very similar to the broader ecosystem, where it's like most people use Python, most people use TypeScript and JavaScript. So nothing sort of super surprising from that perspective.
That's interesting that Excel, for example, supports Python now. I would not have seen that coming. Also, that Python is older than Java is also an interesting one. It's like
That
a
is
super old language, and then now it has this second wind, and everybody's getting really excited about it. So it's really interesting to see how there's a winner that you didn't expect to come.
Yeah, it's also been. I had this conversation with Charlie Marsh. I don't know if you know Astral. They make Rough and UV, which is like Python tooling, like next gen Python tooling, which people really like. UV is like a pip alternative. And we were having this conversation about just like what the fact that AI models are so good at Python and JavaScript. There's like a world where, like, as AI and like a bunch of folks have been putting out, like someone from the Cursor team put out, like, Cursor's generating 1 billion lines of code a day, which is like almost as much as the lines of code that are being generated by humans, or probably maybe more at this point. How that distribution of like the most popular languages is going to like continue to exacerbate over time, where it's like Python and JavaScript at one point could end up just being like 99.9999% of all code on Earth, because AI models so like heavily favor those two languages, which is like a really interesting artifact of the moment that yeah, just I don't know if you have a reaction to that, but it's been interesting to see.
That is interesting because it skews the whole idea of like what is the best language to learn for you as a new developer. I mean, I tell people use COBOL or Fortran because there's going to be lots of banks that need that soon, because those people go in retirement now. So and these things need to be maintained somewhere. But it's it's interesting, and also I'm very worried about this, like 1 billion lines of code a day. And you're like, well, most of this code probably existed already, so why don't you just pull it from there? Like, why is there lots of regeneration the whole time? Like, I found a few of these live code environments that I worked with. I started saying like, okay, make this app, and then like, oh, change the background to green, and it starts building the whole thing from scratch again, rather than just changing that one line of code. And that's something where I think we still have a lot to learn in terms of making these things more efficient and more work like a real developer, and not just like somebody who just basically throws everything out and starts from scratch on every keystroke.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. I think especially on like the code editing use case, it doesn't make sense to regen everything from scratch. So I think there's a bunch of work. The technique actually is already out there from a model perspective. I forgot what the name of it is, but you can basically only regenerate like the diff of what the model has done instead of like having to do everything. So I think hopefully that will be more sort of widely used across the ecosystem.
Cool. Well, I mean, we have an hour, so that's normally longer than we do, and we had a lot of good things to talk about, so that was interesting. So I thank you very much for this. I guess you're getting ready for Google I/O now to answer a lot of questions there.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We've got a bunch of new product stuff landing for I/O, and yeah, and the whole. I think the interesting thing is it never stops. Like, we were just shipping a bunch of, like, this week we had 3 releases, and next week we'll have more stuff, and we'll have stuff at I/O. So there's so much happening in the AI moments that yeah, it's been a lot of fun, but I need a break at some point.
All right, I give you one then. So thanks very much, Logan. This was wonderful. And yeah, we're going to release this in the newsletter again. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe. We got more of those things coming in as well. So any last words you have to somebody who's just starting as a developer? What's one thing that they should wrap their head around first?
Yeah, my honest advice is like, go and use the AI tools. Like, I think it AI really can be an accelerant of like you learning to code faster. And I feel this way as a developer today, where like I'm able to go and tackle like 10x as ambitious of problems because I have AI tools, and I'm able to like actually learn a lot more as I'm building something because there's a whole lot of stuff I don't understand. And instead of just like ignoring the things that I don't know, or going and getting yelled at on the internet by people who think I'm asking dumb questions. AI is sort of, the relentless pair programmer that's there to help support you. And I feel like I've personally gotten better as a developer in the last year using AI tools a bunch. So go and use all the tools. There's lots of great stuff out there. And thanks for having me on for this conversation, Chris.
It reminds me of the fastest way of getting things answered on Stack Overflow. It was never to ask a question, but to show a broken implementation. So people love to tell you that they know it better, and it seems like talking to an AI bot seems to be the same thing. Although I find the conversation sometimes weird, how strict you have to be with a bot. I don't do that with humans. It feels weird to me to actually be like this, like, no, don't do it like that, do that again. So, but you shouldn't be too cautious with them because, as we learned, every thank you costs money.
It's true. Very true.
All right. Thanks very much. And that was Coffee with Developers with Logan Kilpatrick. And we're going to edit this now and push it out soon. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Chris.